everybody joining me right now to talk ACC football. Mike McDaniel, he is a news writer for Sports Illustrated. You can check him out over on the basketball conference, the ACC Football Podcast. Love that name. Also, the Hokie Hangover Podcast, Sons of Saturday, another Virginia Tech spot over as well. But Mike, I appreciate you taking the time. Come on and talk some ACC spring football.
Yeah, Phillip, I appreciate you having me on. Anytime, we get out of like the doldrums of winter post national championship game and we're kind of past national signing day, everybody starts really craving some more football content. And we're really starting to get into spring practice now. I know some teams have already started, some teams are getting it going this week. So it's a good time to really kind of get back into the swing of things because it sounds crazy. It's the middle of March, but fall will be here before we know it.
Yeah, I was telling somebody, another guest had on the show, it really feels like the college football season just ended, and
Yeah.
it is kind of in the new era of college football. There's really no off season.
Now,
You get a little bit of break because then you got the old traditional signing day period. You get a little bit of a break in February, but then I mean you got teams starting spring practice in February, and now in early March. So it is really a 365 year round.
yeah, and unfortunately, I'm a Virginia Tech alum. Not unfortunately there, but unfortunately for Virginia Tech football fans, they've had like coaching hires and coaching changes like really late in the cycle from an assistant coach standpoint. So even when you think you're getting a break before spring ball, you're not really getting a break at all.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case. I mean, I write about Auburn, so they started
Yeah.
on February 28th with spring practice. I looked at it when I looked at the scale. I said, "Whoa, that's all right."
Yeah.
Which they don't play the spring game till April 8th, so it's really a spread out situation for them. But
Definitely.
with the ACC, just kind of looking at a broad scope of the conference, and this kind of bleeds into the other sports too as well. I mean, we're in an age now in college athletics, college football, where everybody's talking about, okay, you see what the Big Ten and the SEC doing, and Big 12 is adding in teams, whatever's going on with the Pac 12 too. Where's the ACC in your opinion in all this?
Well, in my opinion, it really just hinges on what's going to happen with Miami, Florida State, and Clemson. I know we'll talk about those three teams in particular a good bit today, but like if the ACC is able to retain those three teams, I mean, I still think the ACC is going to be a conference that's going to be viable moving forward. I think the reality of the situation, though, is like we saw the college landscape start changing, right? Beginning with the Oklahoma and Texas move to the SEC. Then you start seeing UCLA and USC going to the Big Ten, and it's pretty apparent that it's like a Fox versus now CBS, but really ESPN, right? In a year or two. And it's really a broadcast rights situation where there's so much money going into the sport now that really they're just trying to get as many eyes on those conferences as possible. And really, money drives everything. And that's been the case in college football for a long time. And now there's, NIL and more money going to players. And there's never been more money in the sport than there is right now. And you saw those two conferences kind of, break off and kind of turn into, these two behemoths, right? And these two major conferences in the sport. And I still think they're going to continue to try to add, I don't care what the commissioners say, to the contrary. Once in a while, they're like, no, we're done for now. We're good for now. They're going to keep trying to add teams that they feel like can bring value and bring eyeballs to the screen, because that's really what this thing is all about at the end of the day. So as much as I would like to think that the ACC is going to be a viable conference moving forward, I still think the SEC is going to have those Miami, and it's all about the grid to break away from the conference at some point. But I mean, Tony Syracuse from Last Word on College Football kind of went into it with, some of the other teams across the sport where, everybody talks about grant of rights and teams being able to, stay in the conference, leave a conference. It's not always as binding as it seems, right? Everybody's like, oh, this grant of rights is binding. These teams can't leave. That's not always the case. I mean, these teams can find a way out. There are a lot of smart people in the legal space who are going to try to help negotiate these teams to get to where they want to go. And I think ultimately, like, I think the ACC is fine for now, to just kind of answer your original question. But I think that, that kind of remains to be seen what this conference is going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years. But I think if they lose those three schools in particular, I think the ACC is going to be in a world of hurt. I don't think they'll dissolve or anything like that, but I do think they'd be relegated at that point to kind of like a group of 5 conference situation, unless they merge with the Pac-12 or something like that, which I just don't see. I don't see how that makes a whole lot of sense, just given geographically where these two conferences are located. So ACC is fine for now, but it kind of remains to be seen what it looks like moving forward. Because I do think the SEC is gonna have their say at the end of the day, especially over those 3 schools we're going to talk about.
Yeah, because obviously, where I'm at in Alabama and I'm not far from Tallahassee. And that's kind of like something you hear on some local talk is just, hey, was Florida State ever coming to the SEC because where they're
Yeah.
at? But with the ACC, when I look at them versus the Big 12 and the Pac 12, because the Pac 12 is losing USC and UCLA, and then
Yeah.
obviously Big 12 has lost Oklahoma and Texas, still the ACC. Of those other 3 conferences, they're the ones with the name brand teams, as you mentioned, Florida State, Miami, Clemson. And even when you get into North Carolina with their connections with the Jordan brand and all that stuff, with Nike and all that stuff that they have. So, I
Yep.
mean, that's the thing with the ACC. I think they do have over those other 2. They still have the name brand, like the brands that the casual fan knows about.
Right. No, I agree. And I think as long as the ACC is able to hold on, there's going to be a relevant conference to be had. But I think as soon as you lose those 3 teams, then you're starting to look at a situation where like who's kind of leading the conference at that point? Is it Virginia Tech? Is it NC State? And NC State's building, they've had a pretty decent program under Dave Dorn for a while. Virginia Tech's been down for the better part of 10 or 12 years. I mean, they've had a season here or there, but they've been down. They're certainly not the team they used to be, not the program they used to be under Frank Beamer. So now is that kind of like your flagship leading the ACC? Like Virginia Tech is a brand name, but not like it once was. And I just think that's a lot for the ACC to hang their hat on.
So let's look at it for the now with the ACC. Going into the spring, and it's always what are the storylines going to spring? What are you looking for? So for you, broad question, but for you, what is like the big storylines going into the ACC spring? We know some teams have already started, but as these teams get going with spring practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one is, is this a year where Florida State can jump up and win the ACC, right? And it's the first year it's going to be a divisionless conference, all the, it's a 3-5-5 scheduling format, and, things are a lot different now. There's no more coastal and Atlantic. It's all just kind of one big conference, and the schedules are a lot different now for the teams across the conference. But is this going to be the year that Florida State jumps up and gets Clemson? And towards the end of last season, just kind of seeing where Florida State was and seeing how Clemson was and the struggles they were having offensively, I kind of had a thought in my mind where I thought Florida State would be the team to beat coming into 2023. That changed a little bit for me when Clemson added Garrett Riley as offensive coordinator. I did not think that Dabo was going to make a move away from Brandon Streeter. I think that the pressure was on to do that. But Streeter has been with Dabo, and he's been with Clemson even longer, right? He's been with Dabo since the beginning, been with Clemson even longer than that. He was an assistant on that Tommy Bowden staff that Dabo was on. Streeter has been with Clemson for like almost 20 years, and Dabo moves on from him. And obviously, they had a very good relationship, but the offense was definitely stale. It's been stale for a few years since Trevor Lawrence left. Even the last year of Trevor Lawrence, the offense just wasn't really looking like itself. Tony Elliott moves on. I think that was a little bit of a blessing in disguise, right? Because I think that, that offense under Elliott wasn't looking particularly good. I think Streeter adopted a lot of that. Now you bring in Garrett Riley, right? New, fresh ideas just led TCU to a national championship appearance. And I think it's a really, really good hire. He's an up and coming coach in the business. Obviously, Lincoln Riley's younger brother, really smart, intelligent offensive mind. You have Cade Klubnik, this 5-star quarterback that definitely showed flashes when he played last year, but definitely had plenty of stuff to improve upon. And I think that Garrett Riley is the guy who's going to be able to get the most out of him, right? I think a lot of shade was thrown at DJ Uiagalelei, but I'm not sure that it was much of a DJU problem as it was a Brandon Streeter quarterback development problem. Just kind of seeing how Cade Klubnik looked when he was in, the results weren't really much better, right? And Clemson had some issues to iron out on offense with the offensive line and definitely improving the quarterback play. We know the pedigree's there. But I think Clemson is still going to be that team to beat in the ACC because I think that is such a seismic move from an offensive coordinator standpoint, not only in the ACC, but nationally. Plucking a major coordinator for a lateral move off of a national title participant is a gigantic move for Dabo Swinney that I wasn't sure he was going to make. So a lot of the shade and a lot of the criticism of Dabo Swinney was like, okay, well, he won't move away from what he's done. He won't utilize a transfer portal. He's only going to promote from within. Well, he went external with this hire, and it's a big time hire, and I think it's one that's going to shape the conference potentially this year. But Florida State's got a really good team returning, Phillip. Jordan Travis is a bona fide Heisman candidate. Had a breakout season last year. I made a joke on my ACC show that this is preseason last year. Like, what if Jordan Travis is actually like an ACC Player of the Year candidate, right? And I said that at the beginning of last year, kind of half joking, right? Because he hadn't really proved it to that point, but he had showed flashes in the past. But then he has that breakout year, right? And he ends up being really good. And I think this year he's on everybody's radar as one of the top quarterbacks in the country, not let alone the ACC. So it's really like a Florida State Clemson question. When you look at like Miami, for example, they've got turnover with both coordinators. They got a quarterback situation that's kind of in flux, right? Is it going to be Tyler Van Dyke? Is he going to improve? Like what's going to happen there? There's questions about what they're going to be defensively because of the things we saw last year with some embarrassing losses where they gave up a ton of yards, ton of points. Middle Tennessee game was an absolute disaster. Like Miami's got plenty of questions going into the year. I think there's a lot of pressure certainly on Mario Cristobal, but those are kind of the three teams I got my eye on from a big picture standpoint. And then, you kind of take a step further back and you're like, okay, what's NC State going to be, right? Now they got Brennan Armstrong at quarterback. And, how does that figure into the future of MJ Morris, who I thought looked promising as a freshman last year when he played? Dave Doran's built a pretty good program there with NC State, and I still think they have a good team returning. I think they're going to make some noise. Pittsburgh with Phil Dracovic, like a lot of quarterbacks moved within the conference too. So there's going to be familiar names just at different places. And I think it's going to be a really exciting and deep conference because I think the quarterbacks are going to be pretty good. There's new coaches. Um, there are plenty of questions spring, and I think it's really going to our standing team going into the fall.
So a team you did mention there, I want to throw them out there. North Carolina. Talked about quarterbacks.
Yeah.
Drake May is coming back, but not much around them. They've got some questions on the offensive line. They got to fix a new offense coordinator, Chip Lindsey, which, of course, I told you my background with Auburn. Auburn people hear Chip Lindsey, offense coordinator for somebody else. There's questions because not only there was always questions when him and Gus at Auburn who was calling plays, and then goes to Troy after Neil Brown, can't get past 5 wins. But with Drake May, of course, they're going to have to find some new talent receiver. I know Downs is gone, his top target from last year. What are your thoughts on North Carolina? Or could they be that third team in a conference, or do you think because of what they're replacing, the offensive coordinator, they could take a step back?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. Mac Brown signs an extension, and Chip Lindsey's on now as offensive coordinator. He makes some changes there. Phil Longo's gone. The defense was a disaster under Chiswick. I think a lot of people thought that they would take a step forward. They really didn't. They kind of looked worse in some games, better in others. It was kind of a mixed bag. There are a lot of questions about Carolina, right? And we talk about Heisman candidates. Obviously, Drake May is right near the top of the list as well. But the question around Carolina is where are they going to put around Drake May? And my question is, does it really matter, right? I guess we're going to find out. But defensively is kind of where they've always had their questions. They had a mass exodus. Trey Bly is gone. That's the secondary coach who was a very good recruiter and obviously a Carolina lifer, had a really good NFL career. He's gone. He's out of the fold now. So kind of what happened there. There are just some questions about Mac Brown and just kind of what the ceiling is at Carolina. Because I feel like every year we come into the season with these expectations for Carolina that they don't necessarily meet, right? And you think back to the 2021 season, and you think about, Carolina was being talked about as a, dark horse playoff contender, and they promptly go to Blacksburg and lose the opener. And then they really struggle to win 6 games. And then last year, I thought Carolina should have had, to be honest with you, more expectations than they had the year before. I thought the expectations going into 21 were a little unwarranted, and they didn't really get the hype last year. And I thought they should have. I thought they were a team that, could really perform to the tune of like 9 or 10 wins. And they were a lot better last year. I thought offensively they were really good. They for as good as Sam Howell was, Drake May was just different. He's just a different player. And, Carolina took a lot of steps forward offensively. They were a little bit better defensively. And, overall, I mean, they lost some games they should have won. The NC State game at the end of the year was a heartbreaker. It was a crazy game, right? That rivalry game at the end of the year. I know the bowl game didn't go great for Carolina, not the way they wanted to end the season, but like it's just it's a very interesting team to watch every year because I feel like Mac Brown recruits at a level that a lot of people didn't expect him to at Carolina, but the team doesn't really meet those preseason expectations. So with Carolina, I'm very much like wait and see, but the quarterback play is going to be really good with Drake May, and let's see what they put around him.
Yeah, and it was big for him coming back because you listen to Matt Brown. Apparently, there were some teams that were trying to get him. I have speculation on a team that may have been one of them. They are a little bit north of Auburn. I'll just say that. I have a feeling they were one of them. I'm just not going to say which team. I think everybody listening knows who I'm alluding to. And if you want to get me Row Tide, you know where to find me on Twitter. But you talk about Florida State, and it's really this is a great example of patience by a university because with Mike Norvell and even with Willie Taggart before him, they fired him in a year and a half.
Yeah,
it was okay. You're not doing it, and it almost felt like Mike Norvell was kind of on that track. And then last season they had the 10-win season. Had the 3 losses there in the middle of the year, but obviously, like you said, this is a team that everybody's got some not only ACC championship hype around them, maybe potential some playoff hype around them. You get through the ACC, you beat Clemson. That's obviously the for the video game people out there. That's the big boss you got to get by.
right.
But where have you seen? How has Mike Norvell been able to? One, he got paid. The university was patient with, but just how he was able to get the program kind of back on track.
You hit the nail on the head. That the university has been patient with him, and they weren't patient with Taggart. Taggart really irritated some boosters, rubbed some people the wrong way there at Florida State. That was a rushed hire because of when it happened, right? Jimbo leaves at a really inconvenient time in the coaching cycle, and Florida State's just kind of caught, kind of between a rock and a hard place in terms of like who you can hire as your head coach at that time of year, right? So they were put in a tough spot to begin with, and then Taggart just didn't mesh with the people in charge, right? And that's just kind of the bottom line. And I thought that the Taggart hire was interesting at the time because he didn't really have this huge, like really long track record of success, right? He had some success at the group of 5 level, obviously, but then he went to Oregon, had like one okay season, and then all of a sudden just goes to Florida State where expectations are just unreal, right? Going into it. And I just didn't really think that the hype kind of matched what they were getting in their coach. And I think Taggart's a fine coach. Like, I don't think it's, I know he's had kind of mixed success now going back down to the group of 5, but like, I don't think Taggart's like this terrible football coach, but Florida State expectations are so high and they weren't patient coming off the Jimbo era because it was so successful after Bowden. It's really, really tough to kind of replicate that kind of success. And to follow a national championship coach and Jimbo Fisher is not easy. The cupboard was left bare from a recruiting standpoint because Jimbo kind of mailed it in his last year and a half there because he was at odds with the people in charge in terms of new facilities and stuff like that. So there were a lot of just things working against Taggart when he got there. Then he just didn't, he was not coaching to the level that I think people in charge expected when they hired him. So they pulled the trigger on Mike Norvell. I think it's the best possible move they could have made. Florida State needed a culture change, right? Taggart, it's just kind of there were still some Jimbo players on that first roster there for Mike Norvell, and they needed a culture reset. And Norvell just said, "This is going to take a little bit of time. Y'all got to be patient with me." They had some tough losses in year one, obviously, right out of the gate in September, and that made people really question kind of what this team was going to be. But they've been scratching and clawing, been getting better, and the coaching has been really good. The recruiting has been solid. Norvell and his staff have really recruited, but what I've been even more impressed with is the way that they've developed the talent that existed on the roster already, and that's why I think the turnaround has been as quick as it has been. He's got more expectations going into this year than he's ever had at Florida State. And I think he welcomes that because that's why you take these jobs. You take these jobs for the expectations. You take these jobs to compete for ACC titles and for playoff appearances and national championships. Like, that's why you go to a school like Florida State. I think Norvell has done an excellent job, man. And I think that, the university, the athletic department, the boosters, they should be commended as well because they were patient with Taggart. I'm sorry, with Norvell in a way that they weren't with Willie Taggart. And I think it was warranted with Norvell. I think pulling the trigger on Taggart early was more of a political decision than anything else because he pissed a lot of people off. But I think with Norvell, it was a really smart move to stay patient and just kind of go with the game plan going into it. They said patience, 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 right? That's what Norvell was preaching. That's what the athletic department was saying. We're going to give him time. And that's exactly what they did. It was, actions speak louder than words. I was like, all right, we'll wait and see if they actually give him the patience, if it's warranted. And to their credit, they have. And I think it's really going to pay off for them.
Yeah, I do too. It's been great to see. It's been different in college football, just kind of how teams are. Is it quick trigger on a coach? I mean, look, I cover a team that just fired one after a year and a half myself with Brian Harsin.
Yeah.
So it's one thing you see in college football now. But anyways, Mike, I appreciate you coming on. It's been a lot of fun having you on talk ACC. I told you 15. I've kept you 20, so I apologize
Oh, no problem.
on that part. But if the listeners and viewers wanted to follow you online, where can they find you and all the work you're doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I tend to be a little long-winded too, so I'll put the 20 minutes just as much on me as it was on you. But I'm at Mike McDaniel SI on Twitter, SI.com. I'm a news writer there. I don't just cover college football. I'm a breaking and trending news writer, so I write about all sorts of stuff over there. But if you're interested more in ACC football, basketball conference, the ACC football podcast, check it out wherever you find your podcast, Spotify, Apple, you name it. We're out there. If you're a Virginia Tech fan, even if you're not a Virginia Tech fan, you just want to hear some Virginia Tech content, Hokie Hangover podcast is my Virginia Tech podcast. So go check that out as well.
All right. Sounds good, Mike. And once again, I appreciate the time and I hope we can do this again sometime down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, buddy.